of businesses who understand that when workers have a voice, everyone succeeds. Next time you go get a beer that's from the New Belgium Brewing Company, great example of how they understand that you do well by doing good. Kim Jordan, a real leader who was just at the White House for another conference we had. And, they all are taking a page, as I said before, from the playbook of Henry Ford, who understand, as he said, that if we can distribute high wages, then that money is going to be spent, and it will serve to make storekeepers and distributors and manufacturers and workers in other lines more prosperous. Countrywide high wages spell countrywide prosperity. That is what we're talking about. And these aren't isolated examples. Everywhere I go, I see business leaders combining idealism and pragmatism in new and creative ways. And I'm looking forward this Friday with Kip to meeting with other leaders who've understood this. And Kip recommended to me a while back a book I encourage you all to read. It's called Firms of Endearment: How World-Class Companies Profit from Passion and Purpose. And there you can read case study after case study about companies that understand that the right thing to do is the smart thing to do, who are acting responsibly, not out of charity. This is not corporate social responsibility. This is enlightened self-interest. And one of the stories from that book that I liked the most was a story about Jeffrey Immelt of GE, a pretty large company. And he was talking with company executives about a decade ago, and he laid out the 4 values that the company needed to embrace in order to enjoy continued leadership and success. And the first 3 were kind of things you'd understand and expect: execution, growth, hiring the right people. But the 4th was interesting to me. And the 4th value was the value of virtue. Virtue, he said. To be a great company, he told them, you have to be a good company. And he went on to say that the reason people come to work at GE is that they want to be about something bigger than themselves. The era we live in belongs to people who believe in themselves but are focused on the needs of others. It's up to us to use our platform to be a good citizen, because not only is it a nice thing to do, it's a business imperative. That's not Tom Perez talking. That's the CEO of one of the world's most powerful companies. And there is a growing body of research indicating that when you engage your employees, when you give your workers a voice, there are many ways to give your workers skin in the game, whether it's a labor union, whether it's a works council, whether it's what Procter & Gamble did decades ago, profit sharing, so many different ways to give your workers skin in the game. It is tied to business competitiveness. A growing number of corporate leaders believe that you don't have to check your values at the door or kick people to the curb in order to succeed. And they're not just putting these principles into practice, they're making it their brand. They believe that profit and purpose are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they complement and reinforce one another. They believe private enterprise can be both transactional and indeed transformational. And so, again, let me make it clear, because I'm not talking about simple corporate responsibility. I'm talking about an ethos that you weave into your company DNA. And these companies are shattering all those false choices that we've been indoctrinated with for so many years. They're challenging all the truisms. They're paying higher wages, and they're challenging the truism that undermines competitiveness. They're challenging, so many companies are doing, the big 3. To name 3. Unionization will stunt their ability to grow and prosper. That vigilance about worker safety will be bad for business. And you know what? They are understanding that there is indeed something to be gained from what my mother taught me, which is it's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. And so we're seeing this in action. And by the way, for those of you who are in the public policy school, advancing this ethos and culture is not simply something to be considered and implemented in the private sector. As someone who had the privilege of going to the Kennedy School, I understand, and as someone who spent virtually my entire career in public service, I understand that government at all levels can and must play a critical role as a catalytic force, investing in people, leveling the playing field, facilitating progress, and protecting us from neglect and forces that are often beyond our control. I am proud of the work that we did to help Andrea Rush build her business. I'm proud of the work. I often refer to the Department of Labor as Match.com. We help businesses who want to grow their business get matched up with workers who want to punch their ticket to the middle class, and we use the secret sauce of training through a variety of folks. And so I am someone who is very proud of the fact that I've spent the vast majority of my career in public service, because you know what? I believe that government can be a catalytic force. And make no mistake about it, folks, there are cynics who believe that government is not the solution, it's the problem. There are cynics who believe that we need to starve the beast. They believe that government can't do anything. And I'll tell you, that's not been my experience. I've seen so many examples of how we have been able to use our investments, use our partnerships, and do so many things to help folks. And the cynics who want to starve the beast, I think we're seeing firsthand that the costs of that attitude can be costly in both human terms and indeed in economic terms. It's impossible for me to land in Detroit today without reflecting on the circumstances in Flint. And the federal government's going to be all in Flint. We already are, and we will be there as long as necessary. But the Flint crisis is a totally preventable crisis. And I worked at Maryland Law School when I was the clinic director there. We did a lot of work in lead paint. And I understand the short and long-term health consequences of exposure to lead paint. This isn't simply a public health crisis. This is a crisis of neglect. And everybody in this room, whether you're at a business table, whether you're at the public policy school, whether you're an undergrad, whether you're at another school here, we all got skin in the game. Because when we all succeed, we all succeed. And zip code should never determine destiny, as I said earlier. And communities of color I have seen in my work, regrettably, are all too frequently victims of neglect. And I've seen it in my work in education, seen it in my work in housing, seen it in my work in policing. I see it in all too many contexts. And so we have a real opportunity here. And I am an eternal optimist. I think we can move forward. But I'm not naive about some of the forces that make life challenging. I talk to a lot of CEOs who talk to me about the pressures of short-termism, as they call it. One CEO who said to me in response to a renegade shareholder who was angry at the fact that she was paying people more as a retention strategy, said to that person, you know what? This is how we make our company profitable in the long term. This is how we make it sustainable in the long term. I think I am right. And that person responded, I'd rather be rich than right. That was the pressure that they're confronting. And so many other folks are confronting. But the reason I love coming to schools like these schools here, business schools, public policy schools, and I'm doing this across the country, is because you know what? I'm getting old. And you guys are the leaders. I'm a big believer in the irrelevance theory of leadership. I want to become as irrelevant as possible as soon as possible. And all of you in this room have opportunities moving forward. And I hope that as you move forward into positions of leadership, whether it's in government, whether it's in business, whether it's in state and local government, and I've loved every job I've ever had in state and local government. I've loved my jobs in the federal government. I hope that you will indeed reject these false choices. I hope you will indeed understand that you have the ability to be part of a joint venture that understands that nobody who works a full-time job should have to live in poverty. An understanding that, you know what, before we can move forward, wherever I'm working, we need to articulate a set of principles that we can put in place. And by way of example, I recall that Professor Whitman worked at GM. And there was a guy in the 70s, a remarkable man named Reverend Leon Sullivan, who was a Baptist minister. And he was, I believe, the first African American to serve on the board of a Fortune 100 company. And he used his platform as the first African American to really leverage change. And at the time, it was anti-apartheid activism. But he developed what are called the Sullivan Principles, a simple code of conduct for companies and the nations where they do business. And it included equal pay, non-segregation, training opportunities, quality of life in housing, education, and health. And these principles were a catalyst for divestment, later adopted by the UN. And so as we move forward, and as I've thought about how we build shared prosperity across America, I've been thinking that we need a Sullivan Principles for shared prosperity in America. And these are not principles of corporate charity. These are not principles that are simply applicable to you if you're in the private sector. I think these are principles of proven, effective, long-term governance. And they happen to be, I think, part of the values of who we are as a nation. And so I've thought about a few of these principles, and I'm confident and hopeful that you agree with some, and I'm equally confident that you may take issue with others, and I'm equally confident that I may have left some out. And I hope that you'll give me your feedback. Principle number 1, we need to reject false choices and instead think long term. Reject that false choice, as I said earlier, that you either take care of your shareholder or your customer or your worker. Effective companies do all three and then some. They know it's not a zero-sum game. They know you can't get sucked into what one Fortune 500 executive called the quarter-by-quarter earnings vortex. They know that, as I said earlier, shareholders are best served when all stakeholders are well served. Principle number 2, very simple. If you work a full-time job in America, you shouldn't have to live in poverty. And you shouldn't have to rely on food stamps to feed your family. We can do far better. I keep reflecting on that woman who slept in her car in Detroit the night before our event. We can do far better. Principle number 3, worker voice is essential to business competitiveness. And all of your employees deserve a meaningful say. I happen to believe that when we have strong labor movements, we have a strong middle class. That's not the only way to ensure worker voice, but that is one way. And we saw last week in our data, if you're a union member, your median income per week is $200 more than a non-union member. Workers have got so much game, and they ought to have skin in the game. There are many different ways to provide that voice and give them a chance to contribute those great ideas. Principle number 4, if you really believe that family comes first, don't pay lip service to it. Put it in practice. One of the questions I got in our session just before we got here was, what can we do to give more opportunity to women so that maybe the Silicon Valley and Wall Street will look more like America? Well, you know what? We're the only advanced economy in the world that doesn't have some form of federal paid leave. We got this modern family universe, but we've got these leave it a beaver public policies. I said recently, it's the United States and Papua New Guinea are the only industrialized nations on the world, and somebody flagged me down afterward and said, Papua New Guinea just passed a new law. So stop disparaging Papua New Guinea. So I'm not going to use Papua New Guinea anymore. But the point is well taken. I meet so many people around the world, people who are progressive, people who are conservative, Australia, Germany, Canada, UK. And they all say to me, I don't understand why you don't have federal paid leave in the United States. It's part of our global edge. It's part of our social fabric. Principle number 5, innovation is America's middle name, and innovation will always drive success in business, in government, everywhere. At the same time, the key to long-term success is inclusive innovation that benefits everyone. This principle is so important as we address the challenges and opportunities of the future of work, including, but not limited to, the on-demand economy. The future of work in an era where we continue to see automation and technological advance. That does not have to mean the end of workers as we know them. When we are inclusive, we can do so well. We applaud innovation, but it can never be an excuse to compromise such core labor standards or to leave people behind. Principle number 6, successful businesses